You see what I know?
Boy, things have changed for you the last few years, haven't you?
Yeah. On paper, the night of the broadcast was destined to be the single greatest moment in the history of late-night television. You had the two absolute titans of the industry sharing a stage, live, with no safety net and the entire world watching. In the host chair sat Johnny Carson, the king of cool, a man so unflappable and disciplined that he could stare down a bomb threat without blinking. Across from him sat his best friend, Jerry Lewis, the highest-paid star on the planet, the undisputed genius of physical comedy, and a man who could make an entire country laugh just by crossing his eyes. It was the meeting of an unstoppable force and an immovable object. It should have been magic. It should have been legendary. But instead, it became a slow-motion catastrophe that 15 million people watched unfold in real time, staring at their screens in disbelief. Within seconds of Jerry Lewis walking through those famous multicolored curtains, the energy in the studio didn't just shift, it died. The audience, who had tuned in expecting the lovable, goofy, nutty professor, was suddenly staring at a man who looked like a total stranger. He was sweating profusely. His eyes were darting around the room with a manic, aggressive energy that felt dangerous. And for the first time in his 30-year career, Johnny Carson didn't look in control. He looked genuinely terrified. What happens when a comedy god flies too close to the sun while high on a cocktail of powerful painkillers and massive ego? This wasn't a skit. This wasn't a bit designed for ratings. This was the public self-destruction of a Hollywood icon. The jokes were hostile, the silence was deafening, and the air in the room was so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. We are about to break down the exact moment the mask slipped off the most famous man in Hollywood. From the backstage secrets that NBC tried to bury to the forbidden jokes that froze the room, here is the true, uncensored story of the night the laughter stopped and the friendship that was shattered forever on live TV. When Doc Severinsen's band blasted the opening notes and the applause signs started flashing, the studio audience was primed for a comedy masterclass. You have to understand the context. In 1974, nobody was bigger than Jerry Lewis. The crowd knew exactly who they were about to see. They expected the nutty professor. They expected the cross-eyed, high-voiced, rubber-faced goofball who had dominated the box office for 20 years. They were ready for a man who could make them cry laughing just by falling off a chair or spilling a glass of water. But the man who walked through the curtains that night wasn't the clown they adored. He was a stranger in a tuxedo. Witnesses and insiders backstage say the energy was wrong the second he hit the mark. Usually, a guest walks out with a wave and a smile, soaking in the love. But Jerry, he was vibrating with a strange, manic, almost aggressive intensity that felt less like a performance and more like a panic attack. Before he even sat down, he was sweating profusely, a cold, heavy sweat that didn't match the temperature of the air-conditioned studio. His eyes weren't connecting with the cameras or the crowd. They were darting around the studio like a trapped animal looking for an exit, or maybe a fight. Johnny Carson, who was arguably the best reader of human behavior in television history, smelled the danger instantly. Johnny was famous for his ability to handle anything: drunk animals, rude celebrities, technical failures. But if you go back and watch the footage of this specific night, pay close attention to his body language in the first 30 seconds. It is chilling. Johnny doesn't lean in to welcome his old friend. He physically recoils. He sinks back into his chair, creating a barrier between them, and holds his famous pencil up like a shield. He wasn't welcoming a guest anymore. He was bracing for impact. Carson knew the man sitting across from him wasn't the Jerry Lewis the world knew. It was something volatile, something broken, and it was about to go off like a grenade on live national television. The air in the studio didn't just shift, it curdled. And everyone watching at home suddenly got the sinking feeling that something terrible was about to happen.
Under normal circumstances, Johnny Carson was the ultimate safety net.
He was the best in the business at saving a drowning guest. If a comedian told a joke that bombed, Johnny would make a face, play this straight man, or crack a quick self-deprecating one-liner to rescue the moment. He was famous for turning on-air disasters into comedy gold. But what happened next was something even Johnny Carson couldn't fix. Instead of trying to win the crowd over, Jerry turned on them. He launched into a monologue that wasn't just unfunny, it was openly hostile. He started berating the audience for not laughing hard enough, treating the people who paid for tickets like they were employees who weren't doing their job. But then he crossed a line that you simply didn't cross, even in the loose atmosphere of the 1970s. Jerry, who was Jewish himself, suddenly pivoted into a joke involving a sharp, mean-spirited ethnic slur, specifically a Polak joke, that was so out of touch and so aggressive that the studio didn't just go quiet, it went dead. You have to imagine the sound of 300 people simultaneously gasping and then freezing. The air didn't just leave the room, it was sucked out. This wasn't the edgy shock humor we might see today. It was ugly, bitter, and completely devoid of joy. It was the sound of a man punching down because he was in pain, and he wanted everyone else to feel it too. In Burbank that night, the silence was louder than any applause Jerry had ever received. And Johnny, he didn't offer a lifeline. He didn't fake a polite laugh. He didn't smile to smooth it over. He sat there, stone-faced, staring at the desk. The only sound picked up by the microphones was Johnny Carson tapping his pencil on the desk. Tap, 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 like a metronome counting down the seconds until the nightmare ended. It was the sound of a host realizing he had lost control of his own show, and he was just waiting for the commercial break to save him from his best friend. To truly understand why a legend imploded on national television, we have to look past the tuxedo and the bad jokes. We have to look at what was happening backstage and inside Jerry Lewis's own body. Rumors had been circling Hollywood for months that something was wrong with Jerry, but the public had no idea. You see, for 20 years, Jerry Lewis had built his entire empire on physical abuse. He didn't just tell jokes. He threw his body off pianos, crashed in the walls, and took pratfalls that would have sent a stuntman to the hospital. He treated his body like a prop, destroying his spine for the sake of a laugh. By 1974, the bill for all those laughs had finally come due. Reports and later biographies claim that by the time he sat in that chair across from Johnny, Jerry was heavily dependent on Percodan, a powerful prescription opioid, just to get out of bed in the morning. But on this specific night, insiders suggest it wasn't just a maintenance dose. Rumors swirled that the king of comedy was flying high on a toxic cocktail of medication that did a lot more than just numb his agony. It stripped away his filter. It killed his inhibition. The drugs that were supposed to help him walk had turned him into a man who felt invincible, aggressive, and dangerously unpredictable. That glassy look in his eyes that confused the audience, that wasn't nerves. That was the chemical fog of a man who was physically present, but mentally floating somewhere in the stratosphere. He wasn't trying to be mean. He was trying to survive the night without screaming in pain. And the result was a public meltdown fueled by the very medicine that was supposed to save him. The interview didn't just go off the rails, it crashed and burned, and then Jerry lit the wreckage on fire. Instead of realizing the room had turned against him, Jerry doubled down. He stopped playing the guest and started trying to be the boss. He began cutting Johnny off mid-sentence. He challenged the questions, treating them like they were stupid or beneath him. There is a specific moment in the footage where you can see Johnny Carson's eyes go absolutely cold. If you know Johnny, you know that look. It's the Ice King staring right through you. Johnny Carson could handle a drunk guest. He could handle a boring guest. He could even handle a rude guest. But he could not handle a guest who refused to play the game. Jerry wasn't trying to be funny anymore. He was trying to dominate the room. He was trying to prove he was the biggest star on the stage, and it was failing miserably. The audience, who usually worshipped the ground Jerry walked on, started shifting in their seats. They weren't watching a comedy routine, they were watching a public breakdown. They were watching a man scream for attention and get nothing but silence in return. For the first time ever, the audience wasn't laughing with Jerry Lewis. They were looking at Johnny, silently begging him to make it stop. This disastrous appearance didn't just show a bad night, it ripped the curtain back on a side of Jerry Lewis that the general public rarely saw, but Hollywood insiders knew all too well: the God complex. To truly understand the magnitude of this crash, you have to remember who Jerry Lewis really was in 1974. He wasn't just a comedian telling jokes, he was a cinematic auteur. He was a director, a producer, a screenwriter, and a studio mogul all rolled into one man. When Jerry Lewis walked onto a movie set, he was a dictator. If he wanted quiet, 300 people held their breath. If he wanted a scene reshot 20 times, it happened without question. For 20 years, he was the undisputed king of his own universe, surrounded by people whose only job was to say, "Yes, Mr. Lewis." But on The Tonight Show, he wasn't God. Johnny was. And you could feel Jerry chafing against that reality with every passing second. It was like watching a king being forced to sit in the court jester's chair, and he hated every second of it. He didn't just interrupt Johnny, he tried to produce him. He talked down to the audience like they were unruly children who didn't understand real art. He lectured Johnny like a disappointed schoolteacher, correcting his timing and questioning his questions. He came across not as the beloved, innocent clown the world adored, but as a bitter, arrogant emperor who was furious that his subjects weren't clapping loud enough. It was a shocking revelation for the millions watching at home. They realized that the kid character, the high-pitched, stumbling, lovable goofball, was just a mask, and underneath that mask was a man with an ego the size of the studio who simply couldn't handle the fact that for once, he wasn't the most powerful person in the room. This wasn't comedy, this was a power struggle, and Jerry was losing. When the stage manager finally signaled the commercial break and the red light on the camera faded to black, the relief in the studio wasn't just audible, it was physical. It felt like a fever breaking. The audience, who'd been holding their breath for 10 agonizing minutes, finally exhaled. But for the two men at the desk, the nightmare wasn't over. It was just untelevised. Johnny Carson, usually the master of the smooth segue and the quick recovery, didn't even try to fake it this time. He didn't turn to Jerry with a laugh or a handshake. He simply slumped in his chair, a look of pure, unadulterated exhaustion washing over his face. This reaction was completely different from the anger he showed with Charles Grodin years later. With Grodin, Johnny was sharp, active, and ready to fight. But with Jerry, Johnny looked sad. He looked like a man who had just watched his best friend destroy himself in front of millions of people and was completely powerless to stop it. He didn't say a word. He just stared at the desk, tapping that pencil, wishing he was anywhere else in the world. The fallout from that night was immediate, silent, and permanent. While Jerry Lewis wasn't technically banned for life, he was simply too massive of a star for NBC to blacklist completely. The dynamic had changed forever. The easy chemistry, the boys' club banter, the implicit trust that defined their golden years, it was all dead. From that night forward, a wall went up. Jerry's future appearances were stiffer, more formal, and carefully managed by nervous producers who were terrified of a repeat performance. Johnny Carson, a man who prized control above everything else, knew he could never truly trust Jerry to be safe on live TV again. The bridge between the king of late night and the king of comedy wasn't burned to the ground, but it was definitely closed for repairs. Repairs that sadly would never really happen. That night in 1974 remains one of the darkest and most revealing chapters in the history of television. It serves as a brutal cautionary tale that fame doesn't fix you, it just amplifies whatever's already broken inside. For decades, Jerry Lewis was the master of hiding his pain behind a pratfall and a cross-eyed smile. But on that stage, for 10 agonizing minutes, the world saw the truth. They saw a man who was physically broken, chemically dependent, and desperate for control in a world that was slowly slipping away from him. It was the night the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Jerry Lewis would eventually get clean. He would rebuild his health and even experience a career resurgence years later. But for the millions of people who watched live that night, the damage was done. The image of the innocent kid was gone, replaced by the reality of a tortured artist. It proved that sometimes the people who make us laugh the hardest are the ones screaming the loudest on the inside. So, here is the question. Do you think Johnny Carson should have intervened sooner to save his friend, or was he right to let Jerry dig his own hole? Was this a case of a massive ego trip or a cry for help that went unanswered? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your take. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark side of Hollywood legends, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We are just scratching the surface of these untold stories, and trust me, you do not want to miss the next one. Thanks for watching.